All right, we are recording. Welcome to the Sandag Freight Stakeholders Working Group for our March 23rd meeting. I'm going to share the agenda really quick with everyone. Kind of have a packed agenda today. Just want to confirm, can everyone still see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So let's go to the agenda. Item number 2 is the approval of our meeting minutes. So I know it's been a while since we had a meeting. The last one was in July. So I'm going to scroll down very quickly to the meeting minutes. If everyone could glance at them, and if I could have a motion to approve in a second, that would be great. And please let me know if there are any edits though that you have.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Thanks, Ty. Anyone second it?
I'll second it. This is Alan V. Hill.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. All right. So item number 2 is approved. So item number 3, public comments, communications or member comments. And does anyone have any comments that they want to present right now? If not, we can move to the next item. Right, let's move to item number 4. So let me do this. Okay, just want to check, can everyone still see the PowerPoint? Hopefully.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so item number 4. We wanted to just give a quick background on some upcoming federal and state funding opportunities. As you probably have all heard, there's a lot of money that's going to be available from the federal government and the state government. So this is just a very quick update of some of those programs coming out. It's not to be, all inclusive. These are some programs that relate to freight, but again, there are way more programs that are covered in this PowerPoint today. So just wanted to give that background. So really quick, just wanted to touch base on some of our previously awarded projects that have received federal and state funding. Just wanted to highlight, we've been really successful on the State Route 11 Otay East Port of Entry project for federal and state grants. Same with our low sand corridor. I know the Port of San Diego was really successful on a Tiger grant, which is a federal grant, with the 10th Avenue modernization project. And the city of San Diego was recently successful for the La Media Road project under a state program, which is Senate Bill 1 Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. So our region's done really well. I'm really hoping that we can do the same, if not better, in this upcoming round of programs and actually in the next few years too. So with that, wanted to start off with under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is the federal act. That's the latest one. So the last one was the FAST Act. There are a lot of existing programs that are carried over from the FAST Act. The ones here highlighted are just a few of them, as I mentioned, and a few of them that relate to freight. So the biggies that I want you guys to be aware of, obviously infra, that actually the notice of funding opportunity, or NOFO for short, actually was just released yesterday. The applications are due on May 23rd. So that one has a huge freight focus. It's the federal discretionary funds for the freight program. So anything regarding freight can be eligible at a very high level. There are some intricacies there that we can go over if anyone has questions. But there's going to be $8 billion available over the next 5 years. So just wanted to highlight really quick, the total amounts listed here are over the 5 years of the programs. The next one that's mentioned below is the freight formula funds. California is unique in that our formula funds are actually included in our Senate Bill 1 Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. So I'll talk about that in a couple slides, but anyway, it's going to be around $7 billion available. So just wanted to highlight that. The next one you've probably heard of is RAISE. So that one is more multimodal, so it can be freight related, but it can also have other multimodal benefits too. So that one's going to have a significant amount of money too available, $7.5 billion. That NOFO came out a month or so ago. So those applications are due on April 14th. So that's kind of coming around the corner soon. The next one is Crc. That's focused more on rail specifically. If anyone has questions on that one, we can dive in on that. But traditionally, I know SANDAG goes for our rail projects on that one. The last one is the PIDP program, which is specific to seaports. So I know Port of San Diego folks have applied for that one in the past. So that one's the $2.25 billion available, and those are due on May 16th. And then we will send the PowerPoints out after this meeting, but just wanted to highlight that these are links. So if you have any questions, you can click on these links. That'll bring you to the programs if you want to look at more details. And then these are higher level links too at the bottom. So IIJA has some new programs as well that we quickly just wanted to highlight. The first one being the mega projects one, or it's also entitled the National Infrastructure Project Assistance Program. That one also, the NOFO just came out. It's actually the same notice of funding opportunity as infra. So that notice of funding opportunity, or NOFO, actually includes 3 programs. The remaining one is a rural program. But anyway, for mega, these are meant for really significant, nationally significant projects. So the criteria is kind of unique in that for projects costs between 100 million to 500 million, those will receive 50% of the funds. So you can see the total is 5 billion. So 2.5 billion will be slated for those projects. And then projects that are over $500 million would get the other 50%. So those applications are due on May 23rd, the same date as infra. And then you can click the link and learn more about that when we send out the slides. The next 2 programs are regarding bridges, and they're new. So there's a formula program and discretionary. There's not a lot of information yet on those that I could find, but you can see there's a significant amount of funds available for both of those programs. So as soon as we hear more, we'll definitely distribute that information to this working group. The next one is the rail crossing elimination program. That's for grade separations. Again, that's a new program. So it's $3 billion available over 5 years. And I know a few have really shown interest in that just because in the past there hasn't been a lot of funding, I guess, for grade separation projects. So just wanted to highlight that one. And then the last one's the Healthy Ports Initiative, 400 million. So for our seaports, and not a lot of information, I believe, out on that one yet, but as we learn more, we'll definitely distribute to everyone. I'm switching over to the state side. So the state, as I'm sure you're all aware, has Senate Bill 1, and the 3 programs listed here are capital programs that are discretionary funds. So I mentioned TSEP earlier, or the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. That has the freight focus. We don't know yet the amount of funding for that program. One, because as I mentioned earlier, there's federal funds in there. But then 2, we don't know yet from the state how much will be available of state funds. So as soon as we get that information, we'll pass it along. It's anticipated that the applications would be due in the fall. So the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, kind of the same deal where don't know the funding amounts yet, and it's probably due in the fall. Those require that you're in a CMCP, a comprehensive multimodal corridor plan. So there's guidance on those plans. I know SANDAG's working a lot with Caltrans right now on those plans. So if there's a project you have in mind for that, and it's multimodal benefits, make sure you're in one of those plans so you could be eligible for this program. Just wanted to highlight too, though, that Solutions for Congested Corridors is only meant for construction funds. TSUP is unique in that for cycle 3, likely the funds will be available for, I think they're still deciding, but it should be through environmental and pre-construction dollars, essentially through construction. So, but there's still a little bit of a debate from the California Transportation Commission on the environmental side. And then lastly, we have the local partnerships program. That program's only available for areas that are have the self-help counties and taxes. So in our case, it's Sandag, we have Transnet, so we're able to, our region's able to go in for those, that program. So long story short, the California Transportation Commission is developing those guidelines for cycle 3. That's the upcoming cycle. They're having workshops for each of those programs right now. For TSUP, I wrote it down, double check the date. The date for the next workshop is on April 20th. So if you haven't been attending, I recommend that you do join. They're really insightful and ran very well. And then Solutions for Congested Corridors and local partnerships have their own workshops as well. So you can find that on their website. And again, if you click these links, you'll be able to actually go onto the website. So with that, I know that was a lot of information we threw at you guys. Welcome any questions that you guys might have on those programs. And if not, we can move to the next item. Right. So let me open the next PowerPoint for you, Larry. So our next item, Larry Hoffreiter from the Port of San Diego is going to present, and he's going to present an update on the Port's Maritime Clean Air Strategy, and then also on the zero emission truck transition plan that the Port's doing. So I'm going to pull up that PowerPoint for you right now.
Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Larry Hoffreiter. I'm a program director at the Port of San Diego with their planning department. And Carrie reached out to me a couple of weeks ago and suggested that this would be a good forum for me to provide an overview of the Port's Maritime Clean Air Strategy, as well as kind of some of the stuff that we've completed, as well as some of the items we have underway. So why don't you go to the next slide? So today I'll just take a few minutes. I want to talk a little bit about what provide an overview of the Port's Maritime Clean Air Strategy. As background, it was adopted by our Board of Port Commissioners last October. Just highlight a couple of MCAS objectives that we've already completed, talk about some objectives that are currently underway this calendar year, as well as some upcoming stakeholder engagement and board meetings. Next slide, please. So here you can see the MCAS we're looking at long-term goals in the MCAS. So the first thing is we have our vision statement, where actually it was one of our board members that said our vision statement should really be health equity for all. And by 2030, these are some high-level goals that we want to attain. 100% zero emission truck trips by 2030. We want to transition all of our cargo handling equipment to zero emission by 2030. As well as some other kind of high-level goals associated with hovercraft, port fleet, and ocean-going vessels. Next slide. So those are our long-term goals. These are our near-term goals. So what we've done essentially is we've broken it down in terms of what we think we can accomplish or what we want to accomplish between now and 2026. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that we have the 7 emission sources where we look at opportunities to reduce emissions. But as, again, we were engaging with the community and residents and various other stakeholders, we found that, people and the residents that live near the port aren't just interested in emission reductions. They want the port to do other things as well. They're concerned about public health. They're concerned about community enrichment. then they want to have kind of a better understanding in terms of the process and procedures in terms of how the port prioritizes things. So we have the MCAS looks at 7 emission sources. Then we also identified 3 stakeholder priorities. And those 10 components lead to projects, partnerships, and studies, about 34 of them. And they all deliver the primary benefit of cleaner air. But we also found that there's a lot of co-benefits associated with these objectives: knowledge and capacity building, jobs, reducing noise, ecosystem enhancement. So we went through and we tried to identify not only what the primary benefit was, but what some of the co-benefit examples are of these 34 initiatives. Next slide, please. So by the end of 2021, we actually had already completed 4 objectives. I'll just highlight here. The first is we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the San Diego Air Pollution Control District to contribute $103,000 to install over 500 air filters with indoor monitoring systems in the homes of eligible portside community members. We also committed to identifying the power needs and applying to SDG&E's Power Your Drive program. So that objective is complete. We worked closely, mostly behind the scenes, but with the Air Pollution Control District as they evaluated their Rule 1210, their stationary source rule. And in November, the San Diego Air Pollution Control Board updated Rule 1210, which essentially reduced what was allowable cancer risk. And then finally, our board in November of last year adopted an updated vessel speed reduction program that targets 90% compliance for vessels traveling to and from the bay, in and out of the bay. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a list of a number of items that we have going on this calendar year. And I'll just kind of read down the list and you can see where they're located. First and foremost, we have the heavy duty zero emission truck transition plan. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on that a little bit later. Then we have our port fleet, our own port owned fleet. Earlier this month, the port authorized the purchase of 16 electric vehicles to replace gas or diesel powered vehicles. So we're proud about that. We're partnering with Urban Corps to plant 20 new trees at Cesar Chavez Park. So we were notified, I think a couple weeks ago, that the grant was approved. So we're looking to start that planting, I think in fall of this year. We want to install additional shore power at cruise ship terminal, and that's on schedule to be installed this fall. One of the big ones is electric cranes. We had an old Gottwald kind of diesel crane that was very high emitting. So our board authorized the purchase of 2 new electric cranes that are zero emissions. We're also looking to advance shore power for vessels that call to our National City Marine Terminal. And we're supporting one of our tug companies in terms of deploying the first all-electric tug in the United States. You'll see it, so you can see that's happening all around San Diego Bay. And we actually allocated and we secured stimulus funding from the American Rescue Plan, and 23.3 million of those funds have been allocated for electrification. Next slide, please. So just digging a little bit deeper into the zero emission truck transition plan, my colleague Phil is spearheading this effort. But basically the board, in addition to identifying what the goals are, which is essentially 40% zero emission truck trips to both our terminals by 2026 and 100% by 2030, they directed us to prepare a plan. So in December and January of this year, we collected a lot of data on our existing truck populations and characteristics that call to our terminals. We developed a preliminary zero emission pathway that we were scheduled to bring to our board in March, but that item was continued to April. So you'll see that. But then in the coming months, we'll be looking at an alternative forecast that looks if there's any opportunities to maybe accelerate emission reductions with near zero alternatives. We'll also be identifying recommendations in terms of how to get us there. And then we're scheduled to present the final transition plan to the board in June. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background in terms of the automated, in terms of the data collection. We have an automated license plate reader at 10th Avenue. So we collected, I think, 11 months worth to understand the truck characteristics that call to our port. We also issued, I think, about 241 surveys, many of which went to fleet managers as well as to several drivers. So we got information about the type of trucks that call to our terminals now based upon the efforts in December, January, and February. Next slide, please. So one of the things, and again, because we didn't have a chance to present in March, we'll be presenting kind of the findings and the results to our board in April. But a couple of things that you'll see in that forthcoming report is that our assumption in terms of transitioning to zero emission trucks, one of the assumptions was that a truck you turn over a truck, a useful life of a truck is 800,000 miles or 18 years. We also assume that the baseline battery electric truck can achieve a range of about 283 miles in 2026, and that's estimated to go to 324 in 2030. In terms of fuel cell trucks, our assumption is that fuel cell trucks will have a range of 500 miles. And we're looking at two scenarios, one with opportunity charging and one without opportunity charging. Next slide, please. And just for clarification, opportunity charging is an opportunity to charge the vehicle either via a battery or with fuel cell along their route. So not just at the destination or their point of origin, but somewhere along the route. Then the other information, we're starting to do some stakeholder outreach, and one of the comments that came up at one of our stakeholder meetings was the difference between battery electric trucks and fuel cell trucks. So again, those are two different technologies. You can see the similarities in the middle there. They both have an electric drive. They're both zero emissions. They're both low noise, and they both yield health benefits. In terms of the differences, battery electric trucks tend to be better for shorter distances. There's available models today, but their fueling time tends to be a little bit longer. When you compare that to fuel cell electric trucks, they have a faster refueling time, but there's really none commercially available right now. Those are anticipated to be available in 2023 and thereafter. But again, as you saw earlier, they're capable of traveling much longer distances. Next slide. So while we're tasked with advancing zero emission trucks for the trucks that call to our two marine terminals, we just also need to keep in mind that there continues to be barriers, and we're working to identify plans and programs and ways of overcoming these challenges. There's still cost barriers. Zero emission trucks still tend to be more expensive than at least purchase price than diesel trucks. Electric vehicle and hydrogen fueling infrastructure they're not as widely available. There isn't as many zero emission trucks on the market now as there are diesel. Then there's also going to be some changes in terms of truck drivers awareness, and then maybe even some how operations are currently done. So those are just some challenges that we're aware of that we're looking to address in our zero emission truck transition plan. Next slide. So a couple of other items in the MCAS is we have a health topic. We found that stakeholders and residents in particular were really concerned, not just with reducing emissions, but how that really plays into their and their families' overall health. So we prepared a preliminary health risk assessment for our two marine cargo terminals. We presented that to our board in December of last year, and we're working on updating it and presenting updated version to them in spring or summer of this year. We're also working closely with CARB and APCD on a cumulative health risk assessment that'll not only look at the emissions associated with the port's two marine cargo terminals, but we'll look at highways and rail operations, as well as a lot of the stationary sources that are both near the community and within the community. So we're meeting weekly with the technical team to help make sure that our estimates are based upon the best available science and data that everyone has. Next slide. These are some other items that are still in progress. Again, some of the enabling objectives is we want to do additional research and form partnerships. So we're working on an MCAS and CERP clearinghouse that essentially identifies, that will identify where we're at in terms of obtaining the various MCAS objectives. We have a team that's working on a market study feasibility analysis. We're also exploring credential programs for the installation and maintenance of electrical vehicle servicing equipment. And then finally, one of the couple of the community objectives is to facilitate meaningful and frequent public engagement. So we're providing periodic updates to stakeholder groups. We also formed at the beginning of this calendar year, January 2022, the AB 617 CERP MCAS implementation subcommittee to again work with residents and other stakeholders. I think we meet every 2 weeks. And again, that's just to ensure that there's ongoing communication and transparency in terms of our emission reduction efforts. Next slide. So coming up, we have some community engagement opportunities coming up. So we're presenting to your group today. Very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. We're presenting to our Maritime Stakeholders Forum tomorrow. Then in April and May, the port is having some Pepper Park design workshops, and there's going to be a tables there, and we're going to have a table there staffed. We call them pop-up events, just to provide information in terms of the truck zero emission plan, and again to get out there in the community. We'll be participating in SDG&E's EV Fleet Day coming up. And then we have a Port Tenants Association meeting coming up as well. The other two things is we're trying to rely heavily or utilize, I should say, the AB 617 steering committee. So at the next steering committee meeting, which is April 26th, we're slated to take about an hour to actually walk through and talk about our zero emission truck transition plan. And then we'd like to return to that steering committee again in May and let them know kind of how that final zero emission transition plan is shaping up, as well as how we've incorporated some of their ideas and feedback from that earlier May meeting. Next slide. And then finally, we got some board meetings coming up. So again, our preliminary zero emission truck transition plan is going to our board in April, and then the final plan will go to the board in June. We also have the market study, elasticity study, as well as the health risk assessment that will be coming up sometime this spring, summer. We just don't know which one's going to go with which date yet. So next slide, please. So that's kind of a high level summary. Again, very happy to be here today, and I'm happy to address or answer any questions your group may have. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Larry. Does anyone have questions for Larry? All right, I see a hand up. All right, Riley, you want to ask your question?
Hey, Carrie. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my name is Riley Keller. I'm Caltrans headquarters, Office of Sustainable Freight Planning. My question is about how in-depth I know that it's about ZEV transition, but how in-depth are you also looking at truck parking in and around the ports to be able to support trucks for charging?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So that's actually a separate objective I didn't go into, Riley, but essentially one of the tasks that we have is to, by the end of this calendar year, identify 4 potential charging locations for zero emission trucks. So with that, we're thinking there might be a couple of opportunities on or near Port Highlands, but we're also kind of reaching out to the broader region. I know we're working with Jeff at Sandag, and I think we were working a little bit with, I think Mario, when Mario was at your team at Caltrans, but we're definitely kind of expanding our range because we want to work with a number of stakeholders to again, identify not just within the portside community, but understanding that freight is global in nature. we want to look more broadly in the San Diego region for those opportunities. So in terms of the truck parking, the MCAS doesn't address truck parking directly, but I know at least preliminarily, we're looking at a couple of commercial truck parking spots to see if there's opportunities for zero emission charging at those locations.
Great, thanks, Larry. Any other questions? All right, if not, Larry, thanks again for coming
All right.
and presenting. That was great.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
So the next item we have, it's Tim Garrett and Mariela Rodriguez that are going to present on our critical rural and critical urban freight corridors. So this is a designation that's pretty important in terms of potential funding opportunities, which was actually the first item we had discussed. So with that, I'll let Tim and Mariela take it away and get the PowerPoint up for you guys.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Garrett, Regional Planner with Sandag, and I'll be presenting this item with Mariela Rodriguez. Next slide, please. So we'll begin by framing what we're doing with this work, the process of designating these routes for critical urban rural freight corridors. And then for each of those two different types, we'll go into the legislative requirements, the proposed prioritization criteria for our region, and then our proposed selections. Next slide, please. So for some background, the FAST Act in 2015 established the National Highway Freight Network, which has multiple components, as I'll show on the next slide. Sandag participated in the following couple of years in the Caltrans working group to establish statewide guidelines beyond those that were created by Federal Highways Administration. In 2017, Sandag submitted and had accepted their first batch of CUFC, CRFC segments, which I'll talk about. And then last year, late last year, when the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed, that gave some new urgency for us to consider our important freight corridors that would be eligible for increased funding. And then just right around the same time, we submitted some technical corrections to Caltrans in December as it was coming up to 5 years after the original network was proposed. And then I'll talk about some of the changes that we proposed for technical corrections. Next slide, please. So the 5 components of this National Highway Freight Network, starting from like the top, the biggest group is the primary highway freight system. So this is generally interstate highways, generally long interregional corridors with like the highest volume of trucks. Right below that is kind of a complementary system of PHFS intermodal connectors. And the purpose of these routes is to connect the primary highway freight system to the main intermodal terminals, the ports, border crossings, intermodal terminals, et cetera. After that, there are additional kind of smaller sets, the critical rural and critical urban freight corridors. That's, if we think about like a descending hierarchy, these ones go further into the urban areas and the rural areas to connect major freight generators to that national network. And then there's additionally other interstate portions that are not on the primary highway freight system. So the PHFS is mostly interstates, but there are many segments that are not included on those. And the consequence of this is that those non-PHFS segments are not eligible for primary highway freight program funding. Next slide, please. So this is the map of the current network as of March 2022. So the color scheme that we're working with here, showing the urbanized area in green, so you can get an idea of which types of areas are eligible for CUFC versus CRFC designation. The dark, I guess, gray corridors are the ones that are currently designated either PHFS or PHFS connectors. So you can see Interstate 5, you can see Interstate 15, Interstate 8, Miramar Road, and then there's a few other segments that are kind of connecting to some of our port facilities and airport. So where did it go? So the requested changes that we made in December for Caltrans for the technical corrections was changing out some of those PHFS intermodal connectors. some of the routes that were designated originally weren't necessarily the most sensible. The best places for the routes to be, for example, in downtown San Diego, we had Broadway and like 10th and 11th Avenue connecting from the interstate highway from the 5 to the Port of San Diego's Broadway terminal where the cruise ships are. And that wasn't necessarily like, it makes more sense for the freight corridors to be on Harbor Drive, connecting to the marine terminals that way. So we submitted that as a suggestion, as well as designating Washington Street as an access road for freight to the airport. And then we also suggested changing La Media Road from what is currently a critical urban freight corridor to a PHFS primary connector, since it's connecting the PHFS network to a very major freight facility, which is that Otay Mesa port of entry. Next slide, please. So the process to designate these is pretty similar for both CUFC and CRFC. The main difference is that the CRFC is officially a state-led process where the state designates these routes, and the MPOs designate, such as SANDAG, designate the critical urban freight corridors. But other than that, both cases, it's a collaboration between the MPO and Caltrans to identify the routes, verify alignment with the legislative requirements and FHWA guidance, formally submitting that request, and then several administrative tasks to make sure that the tables and maps are updated to reflect the changes correctly. So with that introduction, I will hand it off to Mariela Rodriguez, who is going to go into the considerations we're making for critical rural freight corridors.
Yes, Tim. I'm Mariela Rodriguez, and I'm a regional planner with the Goods Movement team at SANDAG. Today I will be presenting, can you move to the next slide, sorry. Today I will be presenting the recommendations for the CRFC designations. This table shows the current mileage designated as CRFC in San Diego County, and that's a portion of the SR 11. Even though most of the route is in urban corridor. This part is a rural part. Next slide, please. The FAST Act establishes criteria that a route must meet in order to be designated as a CRFC. To qualify under this designation, the following conditions must be met. The route cannot be in an urban area and must meet at least one of the criteria shown on this screen. Next slide. To conduct this analysis, we use the Caltrans AADT data. We assume passengers, vehicles, equivalent and unit of 1.5, and filter the routes having 16.67% track share of the total traffic, and these are the routes that qualify under the 25% of ADT. Next slide. Requirement B provides, it says that it has to provide access to energy exploration, development, and installation and production areas. And we looked at the California Energy Commission data to locate the energy exploration sites. In the San Diego County, there are no significant gas, oil or gas wells, and only a few that are plugged or idle near Borrego Springs. We consider routes that with 2 or more facilities that include solar, natural gas, and hydraulic plants. Possible candidates include some segments of SR 76, as you can see on the screen, SR 78 and 805 and the 8, sorry. Next slide. Requirement D the route needs to provide access to grain elevators, agricultural facilities, mining facilities, forestry, or intermodal facility. We were not able to find any data regarding grain elevators in the San Diego County, so that criteria was not taken into consideration. And based on the Cal Fire and Forestry Department databases, there were no logging operations registered under their databases in the county. We use the California Department of Conservation agricultural layer to determine the agricultural facilities in our region, and the routes that connect agricultural facilities that are important locally and at a state level are included in SR 76, SR 78, and SR 94. Next slide. This part of the analysis was based on the California Department of Conservation as well. And this requirement, the route has to connect to mining facilities. And most mines in the county have been reclaimed or are in the process of being reclaimed. Additionally, there are 5 mines that are idle, 2 in Carlsbad, 2 in El Cajon, and 1 in Escondido. And there are 4 mines that are actually in rural facilities, which are active at the moment. And those can be found along the I-870 or connecting to I-879, SR 67 and SR 76. Next slide, please. The other requirement for CRFC designation is that it has to connect to an international port of entry. The only port of entry that is in a rural designated area is Tecate Land Port of Entry. And like I said before, there is also a segment of the future Otay Mesa East Port of Entry in SR 11 that is under the rural classification. And that's a quarter mile east of Sanyo Avenue to Enrico Fermi Drive. Next slide. Requirement E determines that the corridor has to be vital to improving the effective movement of freight of importance to the economy of the state. And we took into consideration the routes that are part of the Surface Transportation Assistance Act. And those are SR 67, 76, 78, and 94. Although 94, there are some areas that are not designated as STAA. Next slide. For the RFC designation evaluation, we consider 3 criteria. Is the route an interstate or state route? Is it classified as an STAA? And are there any projects in the regional plan on that corridor? Only the routes that comply with those 3 criteria were recommended to be preliminary consideration for CRFC. Next slide. These are the 2 corridors that are preliminary ones recommended for CRFC designation. The corridors, it must be noticed, that have been adjusted to for consistency with the comprehensive corridor projects in the regional plan. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Tim, and he will discuss the CRFC process. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So thank you for that, Mariela. So back to the critical urban freight corridors. So now back moving toward the urban areas. These are the current CUFC segments that we have designated. As I mentioned, La Media Road was requested to become a PHFS intermodal connector. So if that happens, then 2.27 miles would additionally be available under this pot. So we do have a target allocation for the Sandag region for 28.67 miles. So that would change the number of miles that we would have available. And then I'll point out that the route names are a little bit deceiving. In that SR 11-2 does not actually go to the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry, but rather it's a segment between SR 11 and the Otay Mesa Port of Entry Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Facility as it's currently designated. Next slide, please. So the legislative requirements for CUFCs are a different set of letters, H, I, J, and K. So the main things here, connecting intermodal facilities, providing alternative highway options, serving major freight generators, or important to the movement of freight as designated by the MPO or the state. Next slide, please. So we're looking at intermodal facilities, the main ones being the marine terminals along Harbor Drive and the adjacent freight rail yards, as well as the airport. And then various businesses. We know that various businesses with freight rail spurs kind of throughout the South Bay do exist and are used for transloading. So if anyone on the call has a suggestion for a particular route that's kind of it would be kind of like a spur route that is important for a project or consideration in this light, let me know here. And then also, yeah, I mentioned that Harbor Drive in Washington were already submitted for that conversion. So that's H. Next slide, please. I is the alternative highway options. So as Frank Rivera pointed out in the chat, south of the 805 merge, 805 is on the PHFS and not the 5, except for one segment between Grape Street and the 8. So we've got the existing segments on the left and then kind of alternative highway options that are generally running parallel would be alternative options on the right for consideration under this criterion. Next slide. For J, major freight generators, so Sandag for a few years ago for the 2018 truck visualization study, Sandag identified these areas based on the number of trucks with origins or destinations in these particular areas. So drew lines around these segments, and I'm sure you recognize a lot of these areas as being kind of industrial parks or the freight rail spurs, for example. So we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We just used those with the idea of overlaying the PHFS and trying to designate CUFCs that provide linkages between the existing network and these other zones. Next slide. Important movement of freight as designated by the state or MPO. Well, that's kind of the process that we're going through now with these designating these routes. So the proxy for state importance being the highest level on the Caltrans truck route map, as Mariella mentioned earlier, the STAA network. So the way we kind of thought about this was taking all the routes that are in green or blue, the national network or the terminal access routes, and saying that those were important. These are based on the geometry of the roads to accommodate large freight trucks. And then we've also added routes that were considered important freight routes on our 2021 regional plan, which is in the map on the right as the purple routes. Next slide, please. So the sum of this, similar with the rural routes, is a long list of facilities. So we're proposing some sort of prioritization criteria. Some of the ones that came to mind were readily accessible based on the data sets that we have. Truck volume, safety, including truck-involved collisions that result in fatal or severe injury, and also equity, using the SB 535 disadvantaged communities definition, which was important in kind of administering some of our analysis for the 2021 regional plan. And the thresholds, the numeric ones are kind of established based on the ability of these numbers to kind of separate the segments into two halves. So if we chose too high of a threshold and everything qualifies, or too low, then kind of the same thing, it's not really that helpful. So looking at the numbers, these were kind of thresholds that made sense in our estimation. So next slide, please. So the sources of these data, Sandag travel model, you can see that the segments with greater than 4,500 trucks per day are kind of the gold segments on the map. They're highlighted, as well as the SB 535 disadvantaged communities in red. So the idea being since we're trying to propose going forward some projects that are trying to decrease some of these historical disadvantage, the burdens of freight impacts on disadvantaged communities, we're trying to alleviate those. So trying to propose projects that would reduce that in the future. That's the logic of kind of overlaying those two. And then on the right, you can see the truck involved fatal and severe injury crashes from TIMS. Next slide, please. So this, adding up all of those segments, you can see where each of them was judged to meet the criteria or fit the selection criteria on the right, and then just ranking them by the number of boxes that they check according to these criteria. It's kind of the first crack at deciding which ones should be prioritized. A key absence here is the future SR11 segments which are going to lead to Otay Mesa East port of entry once that's constructed. So that's about 2 miles. But based on the criteria that we've chosen so far, it's kind of hard to say whether or not they meet them because we don't know what the current volume is. For example, we don't know how many crashes or like disadvantaged communities at this point. So it's kind of hard to estimate that. But this is how it would, these are the segments that come up with the criteria that we've proposed so far. And next slide, please. And then this will be the last slide. So thank you for your attention. I'd like to open it up to discussion if anybody has anything to comment on these following points. We'll say that there is an on-off process to turn segments, to designate them as they become necessary for a particular project. If a project is awarded funding and needs to have this CUFC, CRFC designation, it's possible to do that and de-designate other segments as necessary. And there's also a mileage swap option where Sandag can pursue swapping some miles. Right now, we've got targeted 28.67, but if we agree, if Sandag agrees with a different MPO to swap some of those miles, both MPOs agree, send letters to Caltrans for approval, then that's an option. So I'd like to open it up for discussion for additional routes, additional selection criteria that you think that we should consider that we haven't already. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Tim and Mariella. I see there's a question from Alejandra. You want to go ahead, Alejandra?
Oh, hi, thank you. And I apologize if I didn't grasp the criteria, but I was wondering about Otay Mesa Road, Siempre Viva Road, and Airway Road, and if they would meet the criteria. And also, I'm a little puzzled as to the equity criteria or how far away do the communities have to be, because we have so much infrastructure needs in Otay Mesa, and it's obviously because of the port, which sounds like this is the whole purpose, but we don't have like vast amounts of housing surrounding, although we are getting new housing, and your criteria doesn't seem to support these projects because of that, unless I'm misunderstanding the equity part.
Great. Yeah, thank you for those suggestions on the road segments. We can definitely take a look at those segments to see if they kind of meet the criteria that we've already kind of proposed, or if there's additional criteria. Like you mentioned, there's not a high population down by the border. San Ysidro is included, and I know that the border region was just accepted for that AB 617, the Clean Air Protection Program. I'm going to get the name wrong, but the AB 617 community, and that's definitely a different. It's not the Cal Enviro screen, but it's a different way of like kind of deciding like which communities would kind of fall into the equity category. So we can definitely consider that.
When you say that, may I just add? So, like for example, I was just in a meeting with APCD, and they were sharing that all of Otay Mesa is extremely polluted. So is that something you're considering, like the actual communities that are polluted? Because obviously infrastructure projects would help traffic flow more and would supposedly, I would think, improve pollution. Is that not something you're considering?
Yeah, it's not that we weren't considering it. It's just, this was first initial kind of like, this was the SB 535 community was one that we had readily available. We already had, just based on like prior work that we're doing with the 2021 regional plan, we had that available. But definitely we'll look into the AB 617 as a consideration, or other criteria.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Tim or Mariella? I did see in the chat, Frank, thanks for your comments about the query in Chula Vista. So we'll take that into account. Yeah, any other questions? All right, if not, I think, well, Alejandra, thanks for those comments too. We'll definitely look at kind of adding some additional analysis to that equity side. But yeah, if there's anything else, please let us know. I know Tim and Mariella have been working really hard on kind of developing this analysis, so feel free to reach out to them if you have other questions or comments. So thank you both.
Looks like we have a comment from Riley.
Oh, go ahead, Riley. Sorry, I didn't see your hand there.
No worries, Carrie. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to commend you guys on the analysis that you did for coming up with your selections here. Really fantastic work. Looks great. I'm curious to know when you guys are thinking about, approaching Caltrans headquarters for the official nomination of these routes and segments.
Go ahead,
So,
Mariella.
yeah, sorry. So we are planning on taking your guys' comment and incorporating that into our analysis and going to the CTAC to present the renewal analysis. And after that, incorporating their comments and observations, and hopefully present that soon after that to Caltrans headquarters.
Yeah, the idea was to get some feedback from our regional stakeholders from freight, and then just track traffic engineering in general to make sure we don't miss any important corridors.
So hopefully the summer. But yeah, I think depending on the comments from our CTAC group. Yeah. But I know Tim and Mariella, they'll definitely follow up with you, Riley, because I think this is under your realm and headquarters, right? So
yeah, I do oversee the program here with assistance from staff. But yeah, looking forward to working with you guys. So I'll keep my eyes open and my ears open as well. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Riley. Any other questions? Or if not, we'll move to item 7. So item 7 is on Senate Bill 1. Sorry, it's not Senate Bill 1. Senate Bill 671, which is the Clean Freight Corridor Efficiency Assessment Overview. So with that, Jeff Hoyos and Tim Garrett are going to present from the Sandag team on this item. So let me get that up for both of you. And
thanks, Gary.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let Tim take a breather here. I know he just spent some time presenting, so I'll go ahead and present. And Tim, you're welcome to jump in if I forget anything or if you want to add anything towards the end here. But I'll let you take a break here for a second. So thanks, everybody. My name is Jeff Hoyos. I'm a planner at Sandag. I'm on the clean transportation team / climate team. We're doing a little bit of a reorg, but have been working in clean transportation for the last few years. And I'll be providing the SB 671 Clean Freight Corridor Efficiency Assessment Overview today. We go to the next slide, please. So SB 671 is legislation that directs the California Transportation Commission to develop a clean freight corridor efficiency assessment. Well, that's a mouthful, isn't it? And they're meant to do this by the end of 2023. So today I'll provide an overview of where in the development process the CTC currently is, Sandag's corridor nominations, and our efforts to date on the existing RFI ask from the CTC, which is due at the end of this month. So at the end, I'll leave some time for some questions, comments, and discussion. But with that, let's just jump into it. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the CTC kicked off work at the end of 2021 and is currently in the first phase of this assessment, which includes identifying zero-emission vehicle, medium-duty, heavy-duty corridors and collecting information to help inform future phases. So this phase will inform fact sheets for decision makers, as well as some of the projects that will be identified later this year in phase 2. And then next year in phase 3, the assessment will identify barriers, solutions, and benefits. All 3 phases will inform development of the assessment, which is scheduled to be completed by the end of 2023. So in the next few slides, I'll briefly cover the corridors that Sandag nominated for the San Diego and Imperial counties. We worked with Caltrans, STAG, and others to identify these corridors. And the CTC asked for the top 3 corridors per region. But since we're working across counties and looking at District 11, we ended up with 4 corridors. So we'll just keep that in mind. We would love to nominate as many corridors as possible, but we were limited. So with that, let's just jump into the first corridor here. So next slide, please. So this first corridor is the Coastal Freight Corridor. Starts at the U.S.-Mexico border and travels north along the 5 and the 805. Includes major freight terminals like the San Diego Airport, the Port, Navy terminals, Otay Mesa and Otay Mesa East. And if we go to the next slide here, this shows a little bit more detail in the southern portion of the corridor. It includes segments of the 905, Harbor Drive, and the Low Sand Rail Corridor. The CTC requested that corridors be multimodal. So when appropriate, we added rail lines as well to these corridor nominations. And if you have questions or want to go back to any of these at the end here, we can. I am going to kind of just cruise through these for now. So next slide, please. So the next corridor is the Inland Freight Corridor, and that travels north on the 15, where the 5 and the 15 split. And it has areas like the other ones that have pass-through disadvantaged communities and have air quality concerns, have good power supply, and support freight movement. Next slide, please. So this third corridor is an east-west corridor, and it spans San Diego County and Imperial County along the 8. Hits from the Pacific Ocean to the Arizona border. And the last corridor on this last slide here, or one more slide forward, please. There's more than one more slide, unfortunately. Here we go. So this is the last corridor. And this is from Imperial to Riverside. Starts at the border, the Mexico-US border at the Calexico East point of entry, and travels north to Riverside County. And this also includes some rail lines in our nomination. So as I mentioned before, all of these corridors support freight movement, pass through disadvantaged communities, have air quality concerns, has some, not a ton, but some land available for infrastructure for zero emission vehicles, and has power available as well. So these were our submissions to the CTC for potential corridors to be considered in the Southern California or San Diego and Imperial counties. Next slide, please. So this next portion of the presentation is going to shift gears a little bit to the RFI that the CTC released. And as I mentioned earlier, they're doing an information gathering process to help inform fact sheets for decision makers and identify potential projects throughout the state. And so this slide shows the range of topics that are addressed in the RFI. And Sandag worked with the Port, Caltrans, SDG&E, and others to respond to the RFI, identify what we know, what we have information on, what we are still working on, and we'll be submitting information by the end of this month. The responses are due by the 31st, but with Cesar Chavez Day, we're looking at the 30th or earlier. So as part of this effort, it should be mentioned that many regions throughout the state of California and elsewhere are currently in the early stages of planning for medium duty, heavy duty ZEVs, and we want to help support the CTC, but also understand that we are, for example, Sandag is working on the medium duty, heavy duty blueprint in partnership with the port. There's a sustainable freight implementation strategy. And so over the next couple of years, some of the projects we talked about earlier today, so over the next couple of years, we'll really be diving into these topics, and we're hoping that we'll inform the CTC through this RFI process and throughout the entire assessment, but also learn from other regions and collectively work together to better understand and plan for ZEV goods movement and needed infrastructure in the region and throughout the state. So we'll be working with our regional stakeholders to advance SB 671 goals, but also support regional projects like Harbor Drive, SR11, Otay Mesa East, Port of Entry, Forester Road, and Imperial County. And this assessment will also help inform IIJ future funding that is currently also being worked on in parallel. So if you'd like to receive the RFI or submit comments for consideration for Sandag to include, or if you'd like to get more involved in the CTC assessment process, you're welcome to reach out to myself or Tim, and we can help get you connected to the CTC. The working groups meet about every other month, maybe 1 to 2 months. And so we can get you connected if you'd like to be participating in that. But with that, this concludes my overview, and I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Any questions for Jeff?
And if not, if you want to go to the next slide, you're welcome to reach out to myself or Tim and follow up offline. Happy to do that another time. Thank you for your time.
I know we have a lot of designations going on right now, so, but yeah, this one is important, like Jeff said, because it's being led by the CTC. And so I think, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but the final report's due December, you said, right, in 2023 to the legislature. So, so yeah, so if you have questions, if not, we can move to the next item. Thanks again, Jeff. So the next item will actually be on our San Diego and Imperial Counties Sustainable Freight Strategy, which is actually a Caltrans planning grant that we received. So Mariela Rodriguez will be presenting that. Let me get that ready for you, Mariela.
Hello again. This is Mariela once more time. And like Carrie said, we are introducing this Caltrans grant funded project. The project was kicked off last month, and this is an 18-month-old long effort. If you can go to the next slide, Carrie, please. California has established ambitious climate, air quality, and public health goals, and has recently prioritized transitioning the freight sector to sustainable technologies. The freight sector is an important economic engine, but it's also a major source of greenhouse gas emission and pollutants. To ensure that San Diego and Imperial counties meet and exceed those goals, SANDAG and the Imperial County Transportation Commission will develop a sustainable freight strategy to systematically implement multimodal freight projects and policies that would transition San Diego and Imperial counties to a more sustainable, equitable, and economically competitive freight transportation system. The strategy will develop and strengthen partnerships between public agencies, community members, and the private sector through extensive collaboration and input to develop this strategy. We will address environmental justice concerns from freight impacts by incorporating input from our region's disadvantaged communities through public outreach efforts. I would also seek to pilot innovative technologies that might be first in the nation and identify federal, state, and other funding sources for implementation. It would also address workforce gaps in implementing new technologies by creating a workforce development toolkit. Next slide, please. Here is the schedule, the timeline of the project. Throughout this project, the team will be presenting the draft deliverables to the Freight Stakeholders Working Group for you to provide input and feedback and share these documents. And we will share these documents in advance so that you have enough time to review it and can prepare and give us your feedback on it. We plan to come back here to present to you guys in June the draft existing conditions. We will also be presenting to other working groups, COBRO, IMBA, and different stakeholders in Imperial County and San Diego County. Next slide. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions or comments.
Thanks, Mariela. I think one thing also to note, I know Mariela is going to be working very closely with the port regarding what Larry had just presented on their truck ZEV transition plan, and then also with Jeff, who just presented not on the blueprint, but he's also doing a separate effort on a blueprint strategy too. So there's a lot of different plans in the region going on right now, and there's going to be a lot of different coordination between those different plans. Just wanted to highlight that. Any questions? All right, if not, let me unshare for a sec. Right, we can move to item 9, which is Tim's gonna do a quick update on our workshop and training opportunities. Let me pull that up for you, Tim. Sorry, it's taking a second. So just wanted to mention, this is kind of a new item I think that we want to continue having in future meetings. There we go. Let me share this. There's just been a lot of different trainings and workshops that are being announced. So with that, Tim, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Hello again, everyone. And thanks, Gary, for kicking this one off. Yeah, this is one where the more involvement from the group, the better, especially as we go over time. So I'll be sharing about a few different opportunities that I'm aware of, but I encourage you all to chime in either during the call today or after with other things that you think should be on the radar for our attendees. So next slide, please. This is one that Larry mentioned during his presentation a little bit ago. So this is SDG&E's EV Fleet Day. So similar to events that SDG&E has conducted in the past, but this one's dedicated to commercial vehicle fleets, which is really cool. Several SANDAG staff members will be there with a booth to talk about our two efforts, so the sustainable freight strategy that Mariella just talked about, as well as the medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle blueprint that Jeff's primarily working on. Next slide. We also have the APA National Planning Conference coming to San Diego at the end of April and early May. So SANDAG Regional Planner Zach Hernandez he is going to be serving as a lead mobile workshop coordinator. Might be interesting for some of you folks. So he'll be leading a tour that will offer insights into the cross-border dynamic, the ports facilitating the flow of people and goods and efforts to improve mobility to and from the border. So attendees on that tour will visit the existing San Isidro, Puerto Mexico, and cross-border express POEs, as well as the site of the future Otay Mesa East, Mesa de Otay 2 POE. So that's going to be on May 1st at 9:30 a.m. So that's Sunday. And then I'll also be doing a mobile workshop later that day, May 1st at 12 p.m. On a tour that addresses the physical, social, and economic changes that have occurred in San Diego in the past 25 years, as well as land use patterns, natural resource areas, and environmental, economic, and social issues relating to the U.S.-Mexico border. And then the online portion of the conference will be a few weeks later. Next slide, please. These next two are from Metrans Center for Internal Trade and Transportation, their town hall event in Long Beach. They're having an event chasing supply chain sustainability. So that's going to be May 24th in Long Beach. And the next slide. That's going to be preceding the International Urban Freight Conference, INUF, which is May 25th, 27th in Long Beach. Next slide. And then further off into the future, we've heard about the Mobility 21 conference in Anaheim. That's on August 19th, hosted by the Southern California Transportation Coalition. And next slide. And I guess that's it. So basically, yeah, so those are the few of the ones, and we'll be sending out the slides after the meeting with links to register for these events. And like I said, if anybody has any other things to announce, I think that would be great. And we can include more events when we have this meeting next time. So if anyone has any questions, let me know now.
Great, thanks, Tim. Just personally wanted to say that I've gone in the past to INUF. It's a really great conference. It's truly international. You really hear a lot about different research and kind of upcoming trends in the freight sector. So I think it's a really valuable one if you can make it up to Long Beach. And the APA National Conference is fantastic too. So thanks, Tim, for highlighting those. Any questions for Tim? Right, not. Get into the end of our meeting. So let me share the agenda really quick again. So the next item we have is just freight stakeholder agency updates. So I think, Phil, Trom, you had an update, right, that you wanted to share?
I did. Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, and good afternoon, everyone. Just a couple of quick updates to share. So kind of on behalf of APCD, wanted to share that the AB 617 that was kind of referenced in a couple items, the International Border Community group is being stood up now, and that was added to the Community Air Protection Program that CARB administers. And so that was a really exciting event to have that included as a forthcoming community in that suite of communities across the state, which the one is that folks probably on this working group are most familiar with, the support site community that was stood up a while back and has a emissions reduction program already associated with it, and they're in the implementation kind of phase now. So wanted to share that the International Border Community is being developed. And APCD is currently looking for members that are residents, plus a cross-section of organizations, public agencies, industry, and health experts. And so they're accepting applications as part of the committee. And I'll go ahead and just put this little blurb in the chat right now too, so you can see that. But reach out to me or APCD with any questions, and we'd be happy to make sure that that portion is well understood. So hopefully, sorry, that's a big chat to copy in there, but wanted to share that information. And then the second thing is the working group structure. This is a SANDAG item. So as part of some activities that were happening around SANDAG internal organizational effectiveness, some of the strategies that came out of that are starting to blossom and sort of take shape across the agency. And one of those was how we look at our working groups in terms of their structure underneath the policy advisory committees. So what we're doing is changing about 23 sort of in name, right? The 23 working groups that are nested under the different committees to 8 working groups, and those mostly have been assigned an elected official and will be subject to the Brown Act. And a lot of the other ones are topic specific. And the reason I mentioned that is where the freight stakeholders working group comes into. So my guess is by the time we meet next, which I'm assuming would be around summertime or late summer, this group will have a new title. So it would be the freight stakeholders, task force. I guess I'm still getting that right. So I wanted to make sure for those of you that are, nothing will change this. The charter for this group doesn't change at all. It's just in name only. Just trying to kind of make things make a bit more sense under our leadership structure as we sort of all roll to the board of directors. So so when you see that on your next agenda, or the invites or any communication from Carrie or Tim or Mariella or I, just want to make sure you're not thinking it's a new committee or a different committee. That's just a title change. So again, it would be the freight stakeholders task force. So if I got that right, Carrie, I think I did, hopefully. Great. So any questions on either of those two? Great, thanks for letting me share, Carrie, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Any other comments from anyone else? Not, we can move to item 11. Riley, sorry, go ahead.
Hey, Carrie. Yeah, thanks. I don't know if this was an open portion to share things that are going on in Caltrans. Can I go ahead?
Oh yeah,
right.
Definitely. Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, I just wanted to share with you guys about the groundbreaking statewide truck parking study. So we have completed it. It is finalized. So we're working towards getting all that information up on our external website and distributed to all of our folks in the districts and statewide. For those who don't know about the study, the California statewide truck parking study aims to identify and prioritize existing truck parking shortages across the state and propose a range of strategies for providing safe places for truck drivers to park, to ensure safe, efficient movement of goods and reflect local requirements, concerns, and goals. So that's been about 4 years in the making. It's really awesome, and it comes at a perfect time when all of this has been put in the spotlight. So if you guys want to see the report, we can send it to you guys directly. You can reach out to me and I can get that over to you. So thanks.
Thanks, Riley. Really happy to hear that that report's wrapped up, and as soon as you have that posted, we can distribute it to this group here. So thank you. Any other comments? All right. So item 11, we're tentatively scheduling the next meeting for June 2022. So that will coincide with what Mariella said with the sustainable freight strategy and potentially other items too. And then, I see in the chat, Ty, you had a question. Ty's question is, will we be getting chat and presentation items post meeting? Yes. So we will PDF all the presentations and we'll send it out to the group. Yep. And let me know if there's any other questions. With that, I think we can go to item 12 and adjourn. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see you back in June. Have a good afternoon.
Bye all. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Great meeting.
Great meeting.